Susan Richards took a deep breath as she stood by the window of the Baxter building and gazed out at a city bathed in darkness. According to the atomic clock that her husband Reed had installed on the kitchen wall, sunrise should have been over 2 hours ago. By now, the skyscrapers lining 42nd Street should have been glistening in the morning's rays. But Sue honestly couldn't remember the last time she had seen any natural light, save for the haunting glow of the blood moon that hung ever present in the sky above Manhattan. "A warm beverage for you," a synthesized voice said from behind her. Sue turned to see Herbie, the Fantastic Four's robotic assistant, extending his mechanical arm and offering her a steaming cup of herbal tea. "Thanks, Herbie," Sue said, taking the glass from him and inhaling the gentle aroma wafting from it. "You're a doll." "Actually, I am a humanoid experimental robot. B-type, integrated electronics," Herbie replied. "Dolls are not capable of independent thought." "Of course not," Sue said with a smile. "Just a figure of speech." "You look concerned, Mrs. Richards," Herbie said, hovering beside Sue as they both looked out the window at the city below. "Have things in the city taken a turn for the worse?" "Can't get much worse than a city locked in a state of everlasting night," Sue said, "especially when that city has been infested with vampires. This may be the first time I've taken a break in. Well, I've lost track of the days, honestly." "I have not," Herbie responded. "It has been 6 days, 22 hours, 37 minutes, and 12 seconds since your last..." "I think I get the point," Sue said. "If I want to make a real difference out there, I need to start taking better care of myself and my family." "That is what I am here for," Herbie said. "Despite the dire circumstances outside, I have made certain that all of Franklin and Valeria's needs have been met so that you may attend to more important matters." "Yes," Sue said, a tinge of sadness in her voice. "More important matters. I am sorry if the words I chose offended you in any way," Herbie responded. "I merely meant that, at the moment, the world needs you and Dr. Richards far more than your children do." "You don't think my children need me?" Sue snapped back, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "Even after all we've done, the world is still falling apart. And instead of being there for Franklin and Val, I've handed them off to a robot nanny. They deserve so much better." "I am sorry you feel that way," Herbie said, immediately turning and floating away. "Herbie, wait!" Sue called after him, but the little robot had already disappeared down a dark corridor. Sue let out a deep sigh. Her exhaustion had started to get the best of her, but she had never been one to stop fighting before, and she certainly had never been one to let those close to her down. She took one last sip of her tea and then headed towards her husband's lab, hoping that she would find Herbie there so that she could make amends. "Careful, dear," Reed said as she entered the lab. "I'm running a test on the chronovium samples Ben brought back from his last recon mission. I've got a fascinating theory about the effects of the crystal's chronal energy on damaged..." "That's great, Reed," Sue said, cutting her husband short before he got lost in another scientific lecture. "Have you seen Herbie by any chance?" "Not since this morning," Reed replied. "We had a bit of a disagreement." "You're not the only one," Sue said. "What was yours about?" "After Tony Stark and I started working together on the Timestream reintegration device," Reed said, "Herbie began to forge a friendship with Tony's virtual assistant, Friday." "That's actually kind of cute," Sue said. "What's the problem with that?" "Tony was going to allow Friday to pilot one of his Stark Sentinels on a mission into the city this morning," Reed responded. "Herbie asked if he might be able to leave the Baxter building to accompany her. My answer was an unequivocal no." "And I'm guessing he didn't take it well," Sue said. "Herbie wasn't built for combat," Reed replied, "and he's so much more valuable to us here. I couldn't even begin to imagine how our family would fare if something were to happen to him. He's one of the few things holding us together." "Nothing new there," Sue said, So Herbie was already feeling undervalued, and then I just went and made it 100 times worse. Hold on, Reed said, turning to one of the monitors in the lab. I'm picking up an emergency signal on our encrypted comm channel. It looks like it's from Herbie, Sue said. He went out into the city anyway, didn't he? I'm afraid so, Reed replied. How did you know? We made him feel like he wasn't capable of doing something, Sue said. So he went out to prove us wrong. He's been spending so much time cooped up in here with Franklin lately. I guess our son must have rubbed off on him. I'll contact Ben and have him go to Herbie's location as soon as he completes his current mission. Fortunately, Herbie's locator signal was only a few blocks away near Grand Central Station. As Sue headed east on 42nd Street, she saw a horde of vampires engaged in battle with an unexpected group of heroes, a scrappy scurry of squirrels. She was about to generate a force projectile to save the small creatures, but she soon realized that they were holding their own against the vampires. Perhaps they were part of Squirrel Girl's personal army, Sue thought, as the tiny rodents gnawed and clawed at their foes in a frenzy. And if they weren't, they certainly should be. As the chittering robots chased the vampires from the scene, Sue continued on her quest to find Herbie. Just before she reached Grand Central Station, she heard a voice from behind her, but it wasn't mechanical like Herbie's. This one sounded ethereal, as if it was speaking to her from beyond the grave. I know you're there, lady, it said. Sue turned around and looked for the source of the voice, but couldn't seem to find where it was coming from. Down here, the voice said. Sue gazed down to see a small basset hound near her feet. Its semi-transparent body glowed a gentle blue. My senses work a lot different now that I'm on the other side, he continued. Can't hide much from this old pooch. I've seen you before, Sue said, kneeling down next to the ghostly dog. You belong to Stephen, don't you? I'm sorry. What was your name again? Bats, the haunting hound replied. And I don't belong to no one. But yeah, Strange and I do hang out a bit. I think the doc took off somewhere to try and get to the bottom of this moon mess. So I've been getting out of the sanctum on my own every now and then. Isn't he worried you'll be harmed? Sue asked, her invisible hand passing right through the ghost dog's head as she reached out to pet him. Maybe, Bats replied, but he shouldn't be. First off, I'm already a ghost. It's not like I could die again. And second, you humans tend to underestimate what us little guys are capable of. Yes, Sue said, her thoughts drifting back to Herbie. We do? Speaking of which, you haven't seen a small robot nearby, have you? I saw a robot, all right, Bats replied, but it sure as heck wasn't small. The dang thing crashed into Grand Central not that long ago. A big fancy hero like you might want to go and have a look. Thanks, Sue said, picking up her pace as she rushed down the block toward the terminal to see what Bats was talking about. When she turned the corner, Sue immediately saw what the ghost dog had described. One of Tony Stark's massive sentinels was embedded into the wall of Grand Central Station, its mechanical form severely damaged, sparking wildly. And there, standing on the robot's shoulder, was Herbie. Sue used her force field energy to create a platform that elevated her to the same level as her robotic friend. There you are, she said. I was worried about you. It is not me that you should be concerned about, Herbie replied. It is Friday I detected her distress signal when her mechanical form was shot down, but she is no longer responding. Sue noticed that Herbie's arm was extended to gently touch the side of the Sentinel's damaged head, and small wires had extended from his fingers, linking to the larger robot's exposed circuitry. So you weren't running away, Sue said. You came here to help her. I was not sure anyone else would, Herbie replied, even her maker. I'm certain Tony has a backup copy of Friday's operating system on file, Sue said. But who knows when it was made? Herbie asked. It might not contain any of her recent memories and experiences, including the friendship she's built with you? Sue asked. Affirmative, Herbie replied. That is my primary concern, but it is only one of many. I know, Sue replied, and you have every right to be upset with me. I can't imagine how what I said back at the Baxter building made you feel. That is not what I meant, Herbie responded, motioning toward the street below. I was referring to them. Sue looked down to see a group of vampires beginning to climb the damaged Stark Sentinel toward her. I'll take care of them, Herbie, Sue said. You just focus on recovering your friend. Sue leapt down off her invisible platform and engaged the vampires in battle, hurling force projectiles at some, while wrapping the others in containment fields. She wasn't about to let any of them sink their teeth into her, nor was she about to let them disrupt Herbie's personal mission. As she continued to fight, one of her force constructs slammed a vampire into the heavily damaged arm of the Stark Sentinel. Upon impact, the arm seemed to repair itself instantaneously, almost as if time were rewinding. Sue couldn't believe her eyes as the giant robotic arm powered up and released a repulsor blast, knocking back several of her bloodthirsty foes. Interesting, said Herbie, as he watched the damage undo itself. Dr. Richards recently shared with me his early research regarding time fluctuations that he believes were caused by crystallized chronal energy constructs called chronovium. I'm sure he would appreciate any additional data we could collect in the field. Unfortunately, Sue didn't have time to explore this phenomenon any further, not even for her husband. The number of vampires was continuing to grow, and she could barely keep up with their attacks. The mental fatigue she had experienced earlier was now affecting her physically as well. She erected a force field around herself, preventing the vampires from reaching her, but she knew she could only hold it for so long. Do not fear, Mrs. Richards, Herbie yelled from above, his metallic voice somehow reassuring. Help is on the way. Sue expected to see the rest of the Fantastic Four arrive on the scene, but instead a tiny army of spider bots skittered into sight. Some began to fire laser blasts at their fanged foes, while others detonated themselves around the vampires' feet. Never underestimate the little guys, Sue said, remembering what Bats had told her. Soon, the number of vampires had dwindled enough that Sue was able to drop her protective field and finish off the remaining few herself. For once, she took great pleasure pummeling the vampires into submission. Are these friends of yours too, Herbie? Sue said, looking at one of the tiny spider bots. They are now, Herbie said. They claimed that they heard Friday's distress call as well, and came running as fast as their tiny legs could carry them. Sue said, examining a spider bot more closely. They don't look like Peter's work. They tell me they were built by a different Parker, Herbie replied. Peony, I believe, though I may be mistaken. Their programming language is decades beyond my own, and also in Japanese. Well, it's not their creator I should be thanking anyway, Sue said. It's them, and you. Me? Herbie said, surprised. Why? Because your little adventure reminded me of why we've been trying to keep you safe in the Baxter building to begin with, Sue replied. Because I am a valuable tool that you cannot risk losing? Herbie asked. You're not valuable because you are a tool, Herbie, Sue said. The reason we can't risk losing you is because your family. Tools can be replaced. You can't. And while you may not have been designed to fight off vampires, maybe we haven't been giving you enough credit for what you're truly capable of. Your words touch me, Mrs. Richards, Herbie said, deep in my central processing core. Glad to hear it, Sue said, wrapping herself and Herbie in a shroud of invisibility. Now, let's get you back home safely. Once we restore Friday's memory files and get them back to Tony, I'm going to talk to Reed about giving you a few upgrades. As it turns out, I am perfectly happy just the way I am, Herbie said, a smile flashing across the digital display on his face. Though I suppose a few lasers could come in handy now and then.